welcome back. We have made it to the table stakes of doing AI SOC workloads. I would say this is the primary area that I see most of, I would say, the AI SOC space really trying to kind of focus on is the alert triage aspect. And we're no different as well. We also are doing that. Hopefully you've seen so far that, how we are bubbling outside of that and doing much more. And we're going to continue to dive in how we differentiate as well. However, there is a key issue that we're seeing in many of the security operations centers today where everything is generating alerts. There's a lot of noise coming in. Tell us where we should be focusing our time. And so inside of our Exobot Detect settings, we're going to focus on threat findings. And threat findings are going to be anything that has been consumed by the system that is an alert, or Exaforce created the detection itself. So if we come inside of here and just click on finding source, we can see in the last 30 days, we can see SCC from Google has sent us 158 alerts, GuardDuty 110. Exaforce has even created 34 of its own, Azure Identity 15. We have alerts coming from Splunk. So alerts coming from everywhere. And the primary thing that we're just seeing a lot of security operation teams struggle with is first and foremost is that very few teams are fully staffed to take on workloads like this. And secondly, of the team members that you have, where should I be focusing my time? Of 100 or 341 different threat findings that have come into the system in the last 30 days, which one should I really be looking at? Which ones are important to us? So inside of here, what you're going to see what Exaforce is doing is that we have the concept of a data source. This is essentially what generated the data. Where did it come from? A finding source, which is who triggered the alert. Where did this alert come from? In some scenarios, you can see that, for example, it's Exaforce as well. So really just kind of, who generated it? Where did the alert come from? We're also going to have a severity. So just being able to take in the raw alert coming in from a CrowdStrike or Azure Identity or something like that, take a look at the alert, look at the severity that was supplied by the vendor and attaching that inside of here as well. But after the Exobots did all of their work, after they looked at what behavioral baselines look like, because we're ingesting raw data, we're ingesting things like CloudTrail, all of your Azure sign-in logs, Okta sign-in logs, Google Workspace logs, Okta, like CrowdStrike alerts. So ingesting all of this raw data, and we're ingesting the config from each of these as well. I know what your environment looks like from an AWS perspective because we brought the config in and we dissected that and really kind of normalized it inside the environment so we can know, hey, when somebody assumes a role, we have the behavioral model that's letting us know, well, here's who normally assumes that role. We can look at config and say, well, here's what that role has access to. And now when these alerts come in, we can make a much higher fidelity type of triage event because of all that information and the behavioral baselining that we're doing in the environment to overall give it an Exaforce priority. So we could take a look at something and say, hey, even though the vendor came in and maybe said, yeah, we think this is a high or critical, we can take a look at it with all that context that we have. You can see inside of here, we can either reduce the priority of it, call it false positive. Maybe it's benign in some scenarios saying, hey, this is true. It did happen. There's no risk to your environment. And here's the reasons why. And all of those are the type of things that we're doing inside of the environment. One of my favorite ways to really kind of show this is that if we just go take a look at severity from the vendor perspective, and if we can come inside of here, most of the SOCs that I've really interacted with typically have worked from a perspective saying, hey, we are going to go address all criticals and highs coming from the vendor. So your GuardDuties, your CrowdStrikes, your proof points, or whatever it might be that's generating alerts, and saying this has traditionally been our starting point inside of the environment of where we're going to go immediately address alerts. And we can see there's been about 65 of those that have come in the last 30 days. And that's been, kind of just the way that most SOCs have had to operate because there was no context. There was no thing doing the investigation for you up front and providing you with all that context. But since Exaforce has the config, we have normalized data, we have behavioral baselines, we have all the information, now we could come up here and prioritize it. And one of the things that just kind of how I like to show is saying, hey, even though the severity was critical high coming from the vendor, the priority ended up getting set either to medium or low. And if we go take a look at these, it gives you a first-hand look into seeing, hey, how is Exaforce reprioritizing this data based off of information that it knows? And if we go take a look at this, I could go open up this GuardDuty detection that we saw come in. And what you're going to see up here at the very top, this is verbatim what came from GuardDuty. This is the detection. And what you're going to see provided right here is we can say, hey, the data came from AWS. It's a GuardDuty detection. Our recommendation, this is a false positive, and we have high confidence of this. And here's why. And so you're going to see all of your MITRE attack mappings, and we've talked about that a little bit already, but all the workflows that we've already done against this particular event. So you can see there was a workflow initiated. We did a planning session. We're collecting additional data, doing our reasoning, case updates, all of that's being done. And then also you can see right here, here is the Exobot conclusion. Analysis shows this is legitimate activity from this user. They're in the engineering department. User accessed this S3 bucket from this location. They have extensive history of doing this type of activity inside of the environment. They used SSO just like they should. They followed all the steps they should. This is a completely normal event for this user. But if you want to learn more about it, you can learn more. Let's go learn more about the principal, for example, that we saw do these activities. Here's everything that we know, who the person reports to. All of this information is coming from that config data that we're bringing into the environment from things like Okta, Google Workspace, maybe your Azure Identity, the location analysis. Here's everything we know about the IP, where it was done from. And we can tell you, hey, we've seen that user come from here a whole bunch. This is a normal location for them. Let's break down their session. Did they do anything else weird during that session? No, everything looked really normal inside of there. So really breaking down all of the information. These are all the things your L1s were going to ask anyway. These are those typical run books where it's like, hey, this type of alert came in. Let's go take a look at the run book. Let's go fetch all this information and provide it to the case. And then that way we could better assess what's going on. All of this is automatically done for you. And down here, if we scroll down a little bit, you're going to see your next steps as well. We recommend after what we saw inside of here, here's what you should go do. Nothing really to do on this one since we're kind of recommending it's a false positive. But this is the type of analysis that you're going to be seeing inside of here. So there's a new starting point for the SOC to now start operating. Was no longer really going to have to, and you can do exactly this inside of here. If you still want to go look at where the severity from the vendors, highs and criticals, 100% you can do so. However, let me go ahead and clear some filters inside of here. Let's go bring back everything. Is that most of my customers, their new starting point inside of the environment is going to be, and we can just go even like reduce this down to something a little bit more recurrent time frame, is that I now want to only take a look at P0s and P1s that are coming from Exaforce. Exaforce is the one that has triaged all this data already, and they either agreed or maybe adjusted the priority coming from the vendor, is that they think this needs to be looked at based off their analysis. And now we can see in the last 7 days, there's only been 13 things where we say, hey, we recommend these need investigated, and these are P0s and P1s. And so go ahead and diving in here. This one's actually a little bit of a unique scenario because Exaforce was the data source and the finding source. And what that means is it was able to analyze data inside of your environment and go and build its own attack chain detection inside of here. So we can see inside of here, there was a GuardDuty detection that came in that was a high. We could see that there was another one that was a medium and another one that was medium. So 3 different detections. And each one of these living in a silo maybe wasn't necessarily something that you needed to go look at. Maybe not terribly high priority taking a look at each one in a silo, but Exaforce was able to look at these in a much more sequential manner and say, hey, the way we're seeing this be done, these 3 things combined, this actually creates an attack chain inside of the environment. And here is what that means. And so once again, it ran through its workflows, did all of its reasoning, collecting all the data, and it came up with like, hey, we have a high confidence attack chain being established inside of here by this user, confirmed coming in through a Tor exit node, giving you once again all of that information that you would want to know about. And then collectively, once again, let's go break down the principal analysis, location, session, and anything else. And then we can even see things like a behavioral analysis inside of here because we've ingested that raw data and created those behavioral baselines. Next steps, what should we go do next? So same exact type of thing that you saw before. However, This is where Exaforce is able to bridge detection gaps inside of your environment because we have the behavioral based modeling inside of here, and it has the knowledge of being able to stitch together attack chains inside of the environment to elevate stuff into a higher level where typically a lot of this stuff lives in a silo unless you created some manual correlation rule, but you would have to know all the scenarios to create those, and in here this was done automatically for you. I would just want to touch on maybe one other one. Let me go ahead and once again, I'm gonna go remove some of these settings. We're gonna go look at one, for example, that might not be necessarily high priority. Let's just go load Azure data, for example, and then we'll load something. This one was a P3, came in as a high. We down prioritize this a little bit because we know this user and what they do. We have that kind of business context. But we can see this came from an anonymous IP address. We gave all the information why we think this was a lower priority than what was assigned to it. But ultimately down here at the end is that we have options inside of here. Hey, I might want to go message that user. I might want to go message that user's manager. In the scenario where maybe there was an account takeover, for example, I don't want to just leverage the user's input and say, hey, we saw you do this. Can you confirm? We want to also go bubbled up to their manager as well and say, hey, we saw one of your users do this. Is this legit or not? And that's actually going to bubble up more of the priority, up or down based off of their feedback versus just the user themselves. And in those scenarios, we might want to go reset an MFA. We might want to go block the user. So things like that inside the environment. And this can either be fully automated for you, or these can be things where you can say, hey, Exaforce, take me all the way up until that level inside of here. And then we want to be the ones to go push the button to go do the thing. And over here in the command center, you're going to have a full breakdown of everything the Exobots have already done inside of the environment, collecting all the information, the analysis. If there was any messages that were sent to Slack users or Teams users or anything like that, all of it will be inside of here. You can ask additional questions to the system. Anything about like, hey, what does this new user normally do? What IPs? Tell me more about the IP that's impacted. Or you could just come inside of here and maybe look at this from a timeline perspective, like, hey, how did this whole thing kind of take effect? What questions were asked? And be able to look at things that way. So very robust, very interactive platform inside of here. And on the next video, we're gonna dive more into this, but I wanna show you where we reveal all of the information that was provided of how the Exobots came up with their assessment. Thank you.